Okay. Yes, I'm Maryann Lesert. First, I want to say thanks to Linda. Nice concept to bring us all together, the connections to KDL. And I know it takes work to bring people.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's wonderful. I'm fresh off a Great Lakes book tour for my first novel, so I am very aware. Excuse me, Jack, I want to call you by your real name.
Yes, you pretty much anything.
Okay. We were just talking about how when you read in bookstores especially, you can have wildly different audience sizes, from 2 to 40, whether you promote each one or not. So glad to see you all here too. I think what's neat about this panel, listening to what Linda's put together, is we all represent, in some ways, a different slice of the same process. And so I'm going to focus on what I think is my most valuable contribution to it. I've published in nearly every genre, although I don't consider myself a very good poet. For some reason, I got poetry published early on. I always tell my writing students I publish some really bad poetry that I'll share with you. And I think Hazel pointed that out. You grow and change as a writer, and so sometimes you look back on your work and love it, and sometimes you look back on your work and think, what was I thinking? But it has its times and its place. I've also published some nonfiction, but mainly my goal all along has been in the world of playwriting, where I first started out as a dramatist, a playwright. But even when I was writing for the stage and getting plays produced, I always wanted to write a novel. Writing long is something that I'm not afraid of. I love it because I know it takes place in tiny little increments anyway. So my niche here, I think, today is talking about getting an agent and or going directly to a publishing press. And I want to share some stories about that. First of all, the way that I designated time in my life to write a novel was after receiving a bachelor's degree and working in the world of writing and art. And I also have a background in science, so I was working in some ways as a medical writer and editor. I went and got my Master of Fine Arts at a wonderful place called Spalding University, which is a low residency program. And as both writers have already pointed out, and I'm sure Jack would concur, having a place where you can go where you are just a writer, and I don't mean just in a small way, I mean that in a huge way, where other people view writing as so important. Because in our regular lives, it's really, to be frank, writing as a non-paying profession isn't something that is that valued. Now, we're in a library where you have readers, so writing is very valued. But, so it's good to have a place where you can go and be you, the real you who wants to write and can spend a half hour talking about somebody's beautiful language. That's what my MFA did for me. Time, deadlines, and great camaraderie. So I got to this point where I had some wonderful writers that I worked with that were very widely published writers. Sina Jeter-Naslund, Brad Watson, Mary Clyde, Julie Brickman. All of them had, as faculty members, been either bestsellers or even National Book Award nominees. And every one of them that I worked with kept telling me, you know, this novel is really interesting. It's literary fiction, but yet it should have broad appeal because of the character. And basically, when I talk to people about my novel, Phase 10, the novel in general is really about anybody who's been kept away from the core of themselves, somehow held off from what we want to do or what we visualize and know ourselves to be. And I could relate to this, being a writer who really wasn't getting the writing time and the writing oomph that I needed. But it's also specifically about a woman who happens to be an astronomer, a researcher who's been away from her stars for 10 years or more, based on life choices, having children, getting married, not being able to travel maybe to the farthest away points of the globe for these great observatory experiences. So a lot of advice I got early on was get an agent. You might actually get a big publishing house to pick this up because it should cross over all those realms. And I still think that that's true when I see who's buying the book and who's talking to me about it. Equal or maybe more amounts of people that are just interested in that quest for self, regardless of what the main character does for a living. And then other people who are women and men of science and and nature lovers who love the landscape and the stars in the book. So I spent a good 3 years putting the book together. The first 2 getting a great first draft while I was doing my Master of Fine Arts. The next year revising it on my own. It's very research intensive. There's a lot of astronomers and even astrophysicists that I had to talk to. Classes that I sat in on to learn about the inner workings of the stars. So a lot of that time came in research and really getting the characters' knowledge correct. But then I spent just as much time getting a publisher, and sometimes that really scares people. But the general rule is, as we're probably all, depending, going to fall into, as much time as it takes you to write this long work, you can expect it to take as much time to publish it. And it's just the dating game, the finding that match, that person who wanted your book all along, but you don't know where they are. So I sent my novel to agents, and Deb pointed this out, that there's a slow process of submitting your work. You start with a query letter. Sometimes, and a query letter is basically a letter that's sent to the publisher that introduces what your book is about and why you're the person to write it in the most basic form. Some agents will accept a query letter plus your first 5 pages. If you're lucky, they might accept a query letter plus your first 2 chapters, but that's the most that you get to show up front. And then if they like that, so you go query letter, maybe a couple of chapters, and then they ask for the full manuscript. And when they ask for the full manuscript, of course, you're ecstatic, and you have everything invested into hoping they're the one that's going to take it, and very often they reject it. But they have reasons. They might reject it based on giving you the input that I don't think your writing is ready, I don't think the plot or the way the characters are working, and you need to listen to that as an author. In my case, the rejections I got were actually getting, there's no other way to explain it other than to say they were painfully wonderful rejection letters. You're a wonderful, fine, sensitive, intelligent writer, and I love this character and her struggle, but